During the peak of the Cold War, the Soviet Union spent massive amounts of money and effort to build one of the largest nuclear submarine fleets in the world. Their goal was to show military power across the oceans and keep a strong nuclear defense against the West. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Navy had hundreds of submarines, from giant ballistic missile subs to fast attack and multi-purpose vessels. These submarines were built very quickly at many shipyards across the country, including in places like the Kola Peninsula near Murmansk and in the far eastern ports of Vladivostok and Petropavlovsk. Some of these submarines, like the famous Typhoon class, were enormous, over 570 feet long and capable of carrying 20 nuclear missiles each. The Navy operated constantly, with continuous patrols, training, and maintenance, which put heavy pressure on their resources. Over time, a big problem appeared: what to do with all these submarines when they were too old or damaged to use anymore. In Vladivostok, this problem became especially visible. The city was one of the main bases of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, and soon its bays became filled with old submarines that had been taken out of service. Many were stripped of their equipment and left to rust in shallow water. Locals began calling the area the Submarine Cemetery. Some of these old submarines were partially dismantled, but many still had their nuclear reactors inside, making them potentially dangerous. Decommissioning nuclear submarines is extremely complicated. It requires carefully removing the nuclear fuel, handling radioactive materials safely, and then recycling or storing the remaining parts. The Soviet Union had systems for this, but not enough to handle the huge number of submarines being retired. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Russia was left with hundreds of old nuclear submarines but not enough money or resources to properly dismantle them. Many were left floating or tied to docks for years. Experts who studied the so-called Vladivostok submarine cemetery found dozens of submarines sitting half-submerged, rusting in saltwater, with many still containing dangerous materials. Over the years, their metal shells began to break down, leaking contaminants into the sea. Removing or cleaning these vessels is very difficult and requires special equipment and trained workers. The situation in Vladivostok shows both the great ambition of the Soviet Navy and the serious challenges of managing nuclear technology when there isn't enough time, planning, or funding. But even more alarming was what experts later discovered. The region had already suffered one of the most dangerous nuclear accidents in Soviet naval history. In August 1985, at Chazma Bay near Vladivostok, a routine refueling operation turned into a major disaster. Technicians were replacing the nuclear fuel in a submarine reactor when a chain of mistakes caused an uncontrolled reaction. A huge explosion blew the reactor lid off and sent a cloud of radioactive material into the air. 10 people died instantly, and dozens more were badly injured. The fire that followed burned for hours, spreading radioactive particles across the dockyard and nearby land. The Soviet government immediately locked down the area and kept the incident secret for many years. Families of those who died were given little information, and the full scale of the radioactive release was hidden from the public. After the fall of the Soviet Union, reports revealed that radioactive materials like cesium and strontium had contaminated the soil and seabed in Chazma Bay. Traces of radiation can still be detected there even decades later. The 1985 Chazma Bay accident exposed how dangerous and fragile nuclear submarine operations could be. It showed that even small mistakes could lead to catastrophic consequences for both people and the environment. It also became a warning about what might happen to the many decommissioned submarines still sitting near Vladivostok with their nuclear reactors intact. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia faced a massive cleanup problem. More than 180 nuclear submarines needed to be dismantled, but the country did not have enough money, equipment, or workers to handle the task. Many submarines were left floating with their reactors still loaded with nuclear fuel. The process of cutting apart these submarines was extremely technical and dangerous. Unlike normal ships, nuclear subs have radioactive reactor compartments that must be safely cut out, sealed, and stored. Because Russia's economy was in crisis during the 1990s, most shipyards didn't have the funds to do this properly. Some submarines were left half-dismantled for years, while others were simply stripped for parts and abandoned. Environmental groups like Greenpeace began raising alarms, publishing photos of rusting submarines and warning about the risks of radioactive leaks into the ocean. Eventually, international help arrived. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, countries like the United States, Japan, and Norway joined with Russia to fund programs that helped safely dismantle old submarines. Through projects such as the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, foreign aid and technology allowed Russia to remove fuel and dismantle many submarines that otherwise would have remained dangerous. Even with that help, the work was slow and difficult. Taking apart one nuclear submarine could take over a year, and there were hundreds waiting to be handled. And once a reactor was removed, it still needed to be safely stored for many decades. The story of the Vladivostok submarine graveyard and the Chasma Bay accident remains a reminder of how complex and risky nuclear technology can be when large fleets outgrow the ability to safely manage them. It's a legacy of the Cold War that still sits quietly beneath the surface, a warning written in rust, steel, and radiation. After the Cold War, Russia began developing special storage areas to handle the huge number of old nuclear submarine parts, especially their reactor sections. These storage sites were often open-air lots where large steel reactor compartments were placed side by side. While this reduced the immediate risk of accidents, it created serious long-term problems. Even after removing most of the nuclear fuel, these reactor compartments still contain radioactive materials that must be carefully monitored for decades to prevent leaks or contamination. Reports from international experts and organizations such as arms control associations and NGOs have repeatedly pointed out that, although progress has been made in dismantling submarines, many problems remain unsolved. Some submarines were dismantled before being fully defueled, meaning that bits of nuclear fuel may still be trapped inside their structures. Other storage sites were poorly secured and left exposed to weather, corrosion, and even scavenging. In Russia's Far East, especially near Vladivostok where the Pacific Fleet was based, moving these heavy reactor sections to secure central storage areas was extremely difficult and expensive. Financial troubles made everything worse. Even when Russia's economy improved in the 2000s, government priorities often shifted toward funding new military programs instead of finishing Cold War cleanup projects. Insiders have revealed that dismantlement schedules were frequently delayed or underfunded, leaving people living near these storage sites uncertain about the dangers in their own regions. Today, the remains of that long backlog can still be seen. Rows of old reactor compartments are stacked neatly in storage yards, but many still contain low levels of radiation. Some decommissioned submarines are still floating in bays, waiting for dismantlement. In a few cases, officials don't even know the exact status of certain submarines. Records are incomplete or contradictory about whether they were defueled, cut apart, or just left at anchor. Experts agree that this situation teaches a critical lesson. Building a massive nuclear fleet is far easier than safely taking it apart. Each reactor and submarine hull requires years of careful work and millions of dollars to dismantle safely. While international cooperation has reduced some of the most immediate dangers, the larger problem remains unresolved. It's a story of unfinished business and partial solutions, complicated further by political issues. Russia's dependence on international funding for parts of its cleanup raised questions about transparency and control, as not all sites are open for inspection, and some regions still keep their activities secret. For years, rumors circulated about what lay beneath the waters near Vladivostok, whispers of abandoned nuclear submarines left to rust away. It wasn't until detailed surveys and investigative reports were published that the full scale of the problem became clear. Experts discovered a true underwater graveyard, dozens of decaying submarine hulls resting in shallow bays and near the shore. Some were loosely tied to docks, others half-sunken, their steel bodies eaten away by saltwater and time. Locals had already named it the Submarine Cemetery.